Emily Carter swept the concrete floor of Forward Base Alpha's shooting range with mechanical precision, her weathered work boots scraping against spent shell casings that glinted in the harsh afternoon sun. At 27, she had the kind of sun-beaten skin that spoke of long hours outdoors, though nobody bothered asking where she'd gotten it. Her long brown hair stayed pulled back in a simple ponytail, hidden beneath a faded baseball cap that had seen better years. The young soldiers barely noticed her. As they rotated through their marksmanship training, their conversations flowing around her as if she were part of the furniture. Staff Sergeant Bradley Thompson, a stocky man with a perpetual scowl, seemed to take particular pleasure in making her job harder. "Hey, cleaning lady," he called out as Emily approached his station. "Make sure you get all that brass. Don't want any of us slipping because you couldn't do your job, right?" His buddies chuckled, and Thompson kicked a handful of casings in her direction, watching them scatter across the concrete she'd just cleaned. Emily's hands tightened slightly on her broom handle, but her expression remained neutral. "Of course, Sergeant." She began sweeping again, gathering the scattered brass with the same methodical patience she brought to everything. What none of them saw were the small things that would have told a different story to someone who knew how to look. The way Emily's eyes automatically swept the range's sightlines when she entered each morning, cataloging positions and angles with unconscious precision. How she never stood in the same spot for more than a few minutes, always positioning herself with clear views of all entrances. The fact that despite spending hours around firearms, she never once asked about them or showed the curiosity most civilians displayed around military equipment to the soldiers. These behaviors looked like nervous habits from someone who didn't belong in a military environment. They saw a woman who kept her head down, spoke only when spoken to, and seemed intimidated by everything around her. Perfect target for their casual cruelty, Captain Robert Hayes, the range supervisor, noticed Emily's work ethic, but little else. She arrived early, stayed late, and never complained about the extra messes the soldiers seemed to create just to test her patience. In his mind, she was exactly what she appeared to be: maintenance staff doing an unremarkable job in an unremarkable way. But Emily wasn't unremarkable. Every morning when she checked the range's safety equipment, she did it with the practiced eye of someone who understood exactly how each piece functioned. When she organized the cleaning supplies in the storage room, she arranged them with the same tactical efficiency she'd once used for mission gear. And when the wind shifted across the range, she automatically calculated how it would affect bullet trajectory, though she told herself those calculations were just old habits dying hard. She'd taken this job specifically because it was invisible. After everything that had happened, after the failed mission that haunted her dreams and the decorations that felt like mockery, Emily had wanted nothing more than to disappear into work that built things instead of destroying them. Maintenance work was honest, constructive, and most importantly, it kept her hands busy enough that she couldn't think too much about the past. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd once been one of the most elite operatives in the military, and now she was cleaning up after soldiers who barely qualified with their standard issue rifles. But that irony felt like penance, and penance was exactly what she'd been seeking. Thompson's voice cut through her thoughts. "Carter, you missed a spot over here." He was pointing at a section of concrete that was clearly clean, his grin making it obvious he just enjoyed ordering her around. Emily walked over without a word, knelt down, and began scrubbing the already spotless concrete. Around her, the soldiers continued their training, their shots echoing across the range with mediocre accuracy. That made her unconsciously calculate what adjustments would improve their performance. But she kept those thoughts to herself, along with everything else about who she'd once been. In the distance, explosions rumbled like thunder. Training exercises, everyone assumed. Just another day at Forward Base Alpha, where routine drills prepared soldiers for the realities they'd face downrange. Nobody suspected that today, reality was about to crash into their comfortable assumptions in the most violent way possible. As Emily finished scrubbing Thompson's imaginary spot, she caught sight of movement on the horizon. Just a flash of reflected light from what might have been a window or a piece of metal. Her combat instincts screamed danger, but she forced herself to dismiss the feeling. Those instincts had no place in her new life. She was just Emily Carter, maintenance worker. Invisible and unremarkable. She had no way of knowing that in less than an hour, a wounded SEAL would thrust a Barrett rifle into her hands and everything she tried to bury would come roaring back to life. 3 weeks into her assignment, Emily began noticing things that set her nerves on edge. Though she told herself it was just paranoia from too many years in hostile territory. The perimeter guards seemed less alert during their rotations, and the base's defensive positions had blind spots. That made her unconsciously plot better fields of fire. Staff Sergeant Thompson's harassment had escalated from casual mockery to something that felt more personal. He'd started timing her work, claiming she was taking too long on simple tasks. Yesterday, he'd written her up for inefficient cleaning procedures after she'd reorganized the supply closet to create better workflow, something any logistics expert would recognize as superior organization, but which Thompson saw as insubordination. "Carter, get over here," Thompson barked as Emily was finishing the morning range preparation. She'd arrived an hour early, as always, to ensure everything was perfect before training rotation began. "Captain Hayes wants to see your work schedule. Apparently, someone's been complaining you're not pulling your weight." Emily knew no one had complained. Her work was flawless, completed faster than the maintenance manual suggested, and done with attention to detail that exceeded any reasonable standard. But arguing would only make things worse. So she handed over the clipboard where she tracked every task. Thompson scanned it with theatrical concentration. "Says here you spent 2 hours on equipment inspection yesterday. Seems excessive for checking some brooms and cleaning supplies." What Emily had actually done was conduct a thorough inventory of all range safety equipment, identifying several pieces that needed maintenance before they failed and potentially caused accidents. She'd also noticed that the range's backup communication equipment had been incorrectly installed, creating a dead zone that would prevent emergency calls from certain positions. But explaining any of that would require revealing knowledge she wasn't supposed to have. "I wanted to be thorough, Sergeant. Thorough." Thompson drawled the word like it tasted bad. "See, that's your problem, Carter. You think too much. This isn't complicated work. Sweep, mop, organize supplies. A trained monkey could do it, which makes me wonder why they needed to hire someone with your background." Emily's blood went cold. Thompson's tone suggested he knew something about her past, though her employment records had been scrubbed clean as part of her transition to civilian contractor status. Still, rumors had a way of surviving even the most thorough security protocols. "I'm not sure what you mean, Sergeant." Thompson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that wouldn't carry to the other soldiers. "Word is you used to be military. Special operations, maybe. Which makes me real curious why someone with that kind of training is content pushing a mop around here." The partial truth in his words was terrifying. If Thompson was fishing for information about her Delta Force background, it meant someone had been talking. Her anonymity, the one thing that made this new life possible, was already compromised. "I was a medic," she said carefully, sticking to the cover story that appeared in her sanitized records. "Nothing special about that. A medic." Thompson's grin was predatory. "Funny thing about medics, Carter. They usually know a lot about keeping people alive. Makes me wonder what you know about the opposite." Before Emily could respond, Captain Hayes approached with a clipboard and a frown that suggested Thompson's games were about to get official backing. "Carter, we need to talk," Hayes said. "There have been some concerns raised about your work performance and suitability for this position." Emily felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being trapped between telling the truth and maintaining her cover. Hayes was a decent officer, but he was also under pressure from his superiors to maintain base efficiency. If Thompson had convinced him that Emily was a problem, her quiet refuge was about to disappear. "What kind of concerns, sir?" Hayes glanced at Thompson, who was practically vibrating with satisfaction. "Questions about whether someone with your particular background is really suited for maintenance work. Some people think you might be better utilized elsewhere." The euphemism was clear. Somehow, word had gotten out about her special operations history, and now they wanted to drag her back into active duty. The thought made her stomach turn. She'd left that life for reasons that carved themselves into her dreams every night, and no amount of official pressure was going to force her back. "I'm very happy with my current position, Captain. I do good work here." "Nobody's questioning your work ethic," Hayes said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But if you have specialized skills that could serve the military better in other capacities, double quotes. I don't." The lie came out flat and final. "I was a field medic. I know how to treat gunshot wounds and set broken bones. None of that makes me qualified for anything beyond basic medical support." Thompson snorted. "Field medic, right, and I'm sure all field medics automatically know how to spot sniper positions and calculate ballistic trajectories." Emily's heart nearly stopped. She'd been unconsciously doing exactly those things during her time at the range, her trained eyes cataloging potential threats and defensive advantages out of pure habit. If Thompson had noticed those behaviors, her cover was blown completely. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sergeant." "Don't you?" Thompson's voice carried the confidence of someone holding winning cards. "Because I've been watching you, Carter. The way you move, the way you look at things. That's not how maintenance workers act. That's how operators act." The word operators hit Emily like a physical blow. In military circles, it was shorthand for special operations personnel, the elite soldiers who undertook the most dangerous and classified missions. For Thompson to use that term meant he suspected exactly who she'd once been. Captain Hayes was looking between them with growing confusion. "Sergeant Thompson, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Emily Carter isn't who she claims to be," Thompson said. "And I think it's time we found out exactly who we've got cleaning our shooting range." As Emily stood there, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed new life beginning to crumble, she realized that the worst thing about Thompson wasn't his cruelty or his suspicions. It was that he was absolutely right. She wasn't who she claimed to be, and keeping that secret was becoming impossible. In the distance, those training explosions rumbled again, closer than before. Emily's combat instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but she forced herself to ignore them. She was just a maintenance worker now, and maintenance workers didn't have combat instincts. She had no way of knowing that her instincts were absolutely correct, and that very soon, Thompson's cruel games would become the least of anyone's concerns. The harassment had become systematic. Thompson had convinced Captain Hayes to implement new efficiency standards that applied only to Emily's work. She now had to complete tasks in unrealistic timeframes, document every minute of her workday, and submit to daily inspections that inevitably found imaginary problems. Worse, Thompson had begun making comments about her military background in front of other soldiers, dropping hints that made them look at her with suspicion and curiosity. Her carefully maintained invisibility was evaporating, replaced by unwanted attention that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Emily discovered that someone had sabotaged her work. She'd spent The previous afternoon, conducting her weekly deep cleaning of the range's equipment storage, organizing everything according to safety protocols and inventory requirements. But when she arrived that morning, she found chaos. Cleaning supplies were scattered across the floor, safety equipment was jumbled together, and several expensive items were missing entirely. Thompson appeared within minutes, his timing too perfect to be coincidental. "What the hell happened here, Carter?" His voice carried theatrical outrage. "This place looks like a tornado hit it." Emily surveyed the damage with growing horror. Not only would this take hours to fix, but the missing equipment would be blamed on her oversight. She'd be written up for negligence, possibly fired, and her refuge would disappear. "Someone came in here after I left yesterday," she said carefully. "Everything was properly organized when I finished work." "Right. So you're saying someone broke into a locked storage room just to mess with cleaning supplies?" Thompson's sarcasm was thick enough to cut. "That sounds totally reasonable." Captain Hayes arrived with 2 other officers, their expressions grim. Emily realized this was a setup. Thompson had arranged for witnesses to see her apparent failure. "Carter, this is unacceptable," Hayes said, surveying the mess. "This equipment is worth thousands of dollars, and now we have items unaccounted for." "Sir, I secured this room properly yesterday. Someone else did this." "Are you suggesting that?" "Military personnel broke into a storage room to frame you." Hayes' voice carried the disbelief Thompson had counted on. "That's a serious accusation." Emily felt the trap closing around her. Any explanation that made sense would require revealing her ability to recognize deliberate sabotage, which would blow her cover completely. But staying silent meant accepting blame for destruction she hadn't caused. "I'm saying someone wanted this to look like my fault." Thompson stepped forward with a clipboard. "Sir, I've been documenting concerns about Carter's performance for weeks. Inconsistent work quality, time discrepancies, suspicious behavior. This incident fits a pattern of negligence." The lies were so smoothly delivered that Emily almost admired their construction. Thompson had been building a case against her, creating a paper trail that would justify whatever action he planned to take. "What kind of suspicious behavior?" one of the other officers asked. "She asked too many questions about base security," Thompson said. "Wants to know about guard rotations, perimeter defenses, communication protocols. Claims it's for her work, but maintenance staff don't need that information." Emily's stomach dropped. She had asked those questions, but only because her combat experience made her automatically assess defensive vulnerabilities. It was habit, not intelligence gathering, but explaining that would reveal everything she was trying to hide. "I was trying to understand how my work schedule should accommodate security procedures," she said weakly. "Really?" Thompson's smile was predatory. "Because it seems like you're gathering intelligence about our defensive capabilities. Almost like you're conducting reconnaissance." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Emily could see the suspicion growing in Hayes' eyes, the way the other officers were reassessing her presence on their base. Thompson had managed to transform her attempts at responsible work into evidence of espionage. "Sir, that's completely untrue. I would never, wouldn't you?" Thompson interrupted. "Because here's what I think happened. I think someone with advanced military training took this job to get inside our base. I think they've been studying our operations, learning our weaknesses. And when they realized we were getting suspicious, they decided to create some chaos to cover their tracks." The accusation was so ridiculous that Emily almost laughed, but the serious expressions around her killed any humor. Thompson had woven her legitimate skills, her natural caution, and her damaged equipment into a narrative that painted her as a security threat. "That's insane," she said. "Why would I sabotage my own work area?" "To make it look like someone else is targeting you," Thompson replied smoothly. "Classic misdirection." create a fake attack to deflect suspicion from the real threat. Captain Hayes was nodding slowly, his expression troubled. Emily realized with growing horror that Thompson's story was actually believable to people who didn't know the truth. Her special operations background, her questions about security, her unexplained competence, all of it could be interpreted as evidence of hostile intent. "Carter, I think we need to have a longer conversation," Hayes said. "In my office. Now." As they walked across the base, Emily's mind raced through her limited options. She could continue denying everything, but Thompson's evidence was circumstantial enough to be convincing. She could reveal her true background, but that would mean returning to a life she'd fought desperately to escape. Or she could simply leave, disappearing before the accusations became formal charges. None of those options would give her what she really wanted: the chance to serve without killing, to build instead of destroy, to find peace in work that didn't require her to be someone she no longer wanted to be. Behind them, those distant explosions rumbled again, and Emily's trained ear caught something that made her blood freeze. The sound pattern was wrong for training exercises. The intervals were too irregular, the impacts too scattered. That was incoming fire, not outgoing ordnance. She stopped walking, her head tilted to listen more carefully. Hayes and the other officers continued without her, too focused on their suspicions to notice what their own ears should have been telling them. Emily stood alone in the middle of 4 Base Alpha, listening to sounds that her combat experience recognized as the beginning of an attack, while the people around her prepared to destroy her life over imaginary crimes, in a few minutes. Thompson's cruel games would become irrelevant, and everyone would discover exactly who Emily Carter really was. The sound of shattering glass cut through Captain Hayes' interrogation like a knife through silence. Emily's head snapped up instantly, her body going rigid with recognition while the others looked around in confusion. "What was that?" Hayes asked, moving toward his office window. Emily was already on her feet, her mind cataloging the acoustic signature of the impact. High-velocity round, probably from a sniper rifle. Distance of approximately 800 meters, based on the delay between muzzle flash and impact. Her brain ran these calculations automatically while her mouth said something completely different. Maybe someone dropped something in the motor pool. But her eyes were scanning the horizon, looking for muzzle flashes or the glint of scope lenses. Every instinct she possessed was screaming danger, even as she forced herself to maintain the facade of ignorant civilian contractor. A second gunshot cracked across the base, this one close enough that everyone heard it clearly. Hayes grabbed his radio, his face pale with sudden understanding. "Base Command, this is Captain Hayes. Are we under attack?" The radio crackled with chaos. Multiple voices shouting coordinates, calling for medical support, requesting immediate backup. Emily listened to the chatter with the practiced ear of someone who'd coordinated dozens of similar situations, automatically processing the information to build a tactical picture. Enemy sniper. Elevated position, approximately 1,000 meters northwest of the main compound. At least one other shooter providing support fire from the eastern perimeter. Base defenses caught completely off guard. No prepared response protocol. "Everyone get down," Hayes shouted, though his voice carried the uncertainty of someone who'd never faced real combat. "We need to." His words were cut off by the sound of running footsteps in the corridor. A wounded Navy SEAL stumbled into the office, blood soaking through his tactical vest, clutching a Barrett rifle with shaking hands. Petty Officer Marcus Webb had taken shrapnel across his shooting arm and a bullet grazed along his shoulder. His face was gray with pain and shock, but his eyes held the focused intensity of someone still fighting for his life. "Sir," he gasped, looking at Hayes, "we need a marksman. Everyone's been deployed to the front lines. Snipers got us pinned." down from the warehouse district. Hayes stared at the rifle like it might explode. Emily could see the panic building in his expression. He was an administrator, not a combat soldier. The other officers in the room had similar looks of barely controlled fear. I don't. We don't have anyone qualified for that kind of shot, Hayes stammered. Webb's eyes swept the room desperately, looking for anyone who might be able to help. They passed over Emily dismissively at first. Just another civilian contractor caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But something in her posture made him look again. Emily was standing differently now. Not hunched and apologetic like the maintenance worker they'd all known, but straight and alert, her eyes focused on the tactical radio chatter with the kind of understanding that comes only from experience. She was unconsciously positioning herself to cover the room's entrance, and her hands had the relaxed readiness of someone comfortable with violence. You, Webb said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Have you ever fired a rifle? Emily hesitated. For exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which she weighed her carefully constructed new life against the reality of the situation. 3 seconds during which she could hear more gunfire, more radio calls for help, more evidence that people were dying. Yes, she said simply. Webb thrust the Barrett into her hands without ceremony. There's a sniper on the warehouse roof, about 1,200 meters out. He's picking off anyone who tries to move between buildings. You take him out or we're all dead. The weight of the rifle's like coming home to a place she'd tried to forget. Every control was exactly where muscle memory expected. Every balance point familiar from countless hours of training and combat use. For a moment, Emily just stood there, feeling the weapon settle into her hands like it belonged there. Captain Hayes was staring at her with something approaching horror. Carter, what are you doing? You can't possibly know how to. She does. The voice came from Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had appeared in the doorway with his own weapon drawn. For once, his expression held no mockery, only professional assessment. Look at how she's holding it. That's not someone who's never touched a Barrett before. Emily ignored them all. She could feel her old training reasserting itself, pushing aside months of careful suppression. The rifle's scope needed adjustment for the range and wind conditions. The shooting position would need to account for the Barrett's massive recoil. Most importantly, she had to move fast. Every second of delay meant more casualties. I need to get to the shooting tower, she said, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone step back automatically. Webb nodded. 3rd floor, northwest. Corner. Best firing position on the base. Emily was already moving, carrying the Barrett with practiced ease. Behind her, she could hear Hayes trying to process what was happening. Thompson, what did you mean she's handled one before? Her file says she was a medic. Thompson's laugh held no humor. Captain, I've been trying to tell you for weeks. Emily Carter isn't just a medic. Look at the way she moves with that rifle. That's special operations level training. Emily paused. At the doorway, looking back at the officers who had spent so much energy trying to destroy her quiet life. In a few minutes, they would have their answer about who she really was. But right now, none of that mattered. Stay away from the windows, she told them, and keep that radio channel open. I'll need spotting information. As she headed for the shooting tower, Emily felt the last pieces of her carefully constructed facade falling away. Emily Carter, maintenance worker, was disappearing. In her place was someone whose existence officially never happened, whose skills had been forged in the crucible of the world's most dangerous operations. The soldiers of Forward Base Alpha were about to discover they'd been sharing their home with a ghost. Emily climbed the shooting tower stairs 3 at a time, her movement fluid and purposeful in a way that would have shocked anyone who'd watched her shuffle through maintenance duties. The Barrett felt natural in her hands. its weight distributed perfectly as she navigated the tight stairwell. Behind her, she could hear Thompson's voice on the radio. "All stations, we have a shooter moving to overwatch position. Maintain covering. Fire and keep your heads down." The third floor of the tower was a sniper's dream, reinforced. Concrete walls with narrow firing ports that provided excellent protection, while maintaining clear sight lines across the entire base perimeter. Emily moved to the northwest port and immediately began setting up her shot. Through the Barrett's scope, she could see the warehouse district clearly. The enemy sniper had chosen his position well elevated, with multiple escape routes, and far enough away that most base personnel wouldn't even think to look for him there. But Emily's trained eye picked out the small details that revealed his location. A slight shadow inconsistency on the rooftop, the barely visible outline of a rifle barrel, the faint glint of scope glass catching sunlight. 1,200 meters. Crosswind from the southwest at approximately 15 miles per hour. Target partially concealed, moving slightly to track different victims. Extremely difficult shot under ideal conditions. Nearly impossible under combat stress. Emily's breathing steadied automatically, her heart rate dropping into the controlled rhythm she'd learned in some of the military's most classified training programs. Around her, the chaos of the attack faded into background noise as her focus narrowed to the essential elements: target, range, wind, trajectory. "Overwatch, this is command." Hayes' voice crackled through her radio. "What's your status?" "Target." "Acquired," Emily replied, her voice carrying none of the uncertainty that had characterized her speech for months. 1,200 meters, single shooter, partially concealed rooftop position. Webb's voice joined the channel. "That's an impossible shot at that range, even for our best marksman." Emily didn't respond. She was making micro-adjustments to the Barrett scope, compensating for factors that most snipers would need calculators and wind meters to determine. But Emily had made shots like this before, in conditions far worse than a sunny afternoon on a well-maintained base. The enemy sniper shifted slightly, bringing his rifle to bear on a group of soldiers trying to move between buildings. Emily could see them through her scope. Young faces filled with panic, completely exposed to the shooter's field of fire. She squeezed the trigger. The Barrett's recoil was tremendous, but Emily absorbed it smoothly, already cycling the bolt for a follow-up shot. Through the scope, she watched the enemy sniper's rifle tumble from the rooftop as his body collapsed. "Target down," she reported calmly. The radio exploded with surprised voices. Webb's was the clearest. Holy hell, she actually made that shot. But Emily was already shifting her aim. Her combat experience told her that lone snipers were rare. There had to be supporting elements somewhere. She scanned the eastern perimeter, methodically, looking for the secondary threats the doctrine suggested would be present. There, 2 shooters with assault rifles, moving to flank the main compound. They were trying to use the sniper's distraction to get into position for a devastating crossfire attack on the base's defenders. Emily's second shot dropped the lead shooter before he could reach his firing position. Her third eliminated his partner as he tried to retreat. The entire engagement took less than 90 seconds from her first trigger pull. "Multiple targets eliminated," she reported. "Immediate threat neutralized." The radio channel went silent for several seconds. Finally, Webb's voice came through, filled with something approaching awe. "Who the hell are you?" Emily set the Barrett down carefully, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. For the first time in months, she felt like herself. Again, not the broken, guilt-ridden refugee from a failed mission, but the highly trained professional who had spent years protecting others through violence that remained officially invisible. "Maintenance staff," she said, though the words sounded hollow even to her. Thompson's laugh crackled through the radio. "Maintenance staff, my ass. Nobody makes shots like that without advanced training. That was special operations level marksmanship. Emily closed her eyes, knowing that her secret was finally, irreversibly blown. There was no explaining away what had just happened, no way to return to the quiet anonymity she'd fought so hard to maintain. Overwatch, return to command immediately, Hayes ordered. We need to debrief this situation. As Emily descended the shooting tower, she felt like she was walking toward a firing squad. Everyone would have questions now, questions about her. Background, her training, a real reason for being at Forward Base Alpha. The careful lies that had protected her peace would crumble under scrutiny, and she'd be forced back into a world she desperately tried to leave behind. But as she reached the ground floor, she realized something had changed in how people were looking at her. The dismissive glances were gone, replaced by respect and curiosity. Soldiers who had barely acknowledged her existence were now watching her with the attention reserved for someone whose expertise might keep them alive. Webb was waiting for her outside the tower, his wounds bandaged but his eyes sharp with professional assessment. I've seen a lot of shooters in my time, he said quietly. What you just did ... that wasn't luck. Emily handed him the Barrett without meeting his eyes. Sometimes you get fortunate. Fortunate doesn't account for reading Winded. 1,200 meters. Fortunate doesn't explain how you knew exactly where to find secondary targets. Webb's voice carried the authority of someone who recognized elite training when he saw it. You want to tell me who you really are? Before Emily could answer, Captain Hayes appeared with a small group of officers. Their expressions ranged from confusion to suspicion to something that might have been admiration. Carter, Hayes said carefully, I think we need to have a different kind of conversation now. Emily nodded, knowing that the life she built at Forward Base Alpha was over. But as she looked around at the soldiers who were alive because of her actions, she realized that maybe destruction wasn't always the wrong choice. Sometimes, the skills you tried to bury were exactly what the world needed from you. The conference room felt different this time. Instead of the hostile interrogation Emily had expected, she found herself facing a group of officers whose expressions mixed respect with intense curiosity. Captain Hayes sat across from her, but the dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer a suspected security threat, but an enigma that demanded explanation. Commander Jessica Reynolds, Forward Base Alpha's senior officer, had been called in from the main compound. Her steel-gray hair and weathered face spoke of decades in military service, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who'd seen enough combat to recognize the real thing when it appeared. Miss Carter, Reynolds began, her voice carefully neutral. Today's events have raised some significant questions about your background and qualifications. Emily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. The maintenance worker persona felt impossible to maintain now, but she wasn't ready to abandon it completely. I did what anyone would have done in that situation. Petty Officer Webb, his arm now properly treated and in a sling, shook his head. Firmly, ma'am, with all due respect, that's not true. I've worked with some of the best snipers in the Navy, and what you did today, ... those weren't shots that anyone could make. Thompson leaned forward, his earlier hostility replaced by professional curiosity. The way you handled that Barrett, the speed of your target acquisition, the compensation for environmental factors, that's advanced sniper training. Years of it. Emily felt the walls closing in. Each observation was accurate, each assessment correct. Her cover story was crumbling under the weight of competence she couldn't hide. I had some military experience, she admitted carefully. Basic marksmanship training. Reynolds pulled out a file folder that made Emily's heart sink. It was thick, official, and carried the kind of security classifications that meant her real background had been discovered. Emily Carter, Reynolds read aloud. Former Staff Sergeant, United States Army. Specialized in combat medicine and designated marksmanship. Served 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and participated in classified operations across multiple theaters. The room went completely silent. Emily stared at the table, knowing that her carefully constructed anonymity was evaporating with each word. Reynolds continued, decorated for valor on multiple occasions. Cross-trained as both combat medic and sniper, a specialization held by fewer than 50 personnel in military history. Member of Delta Force for the final 4 years of her service. The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Delta Force was legendary, even among special operations units, representing the absolute pinnacle of military expertise. To discover that their maintenance worker was actually one of the most elite soldiers in the American military was like learning. They'd been sharing coffee with a superhero. Jesus Christ, Webb whispered. Delta Force. Emily finally looked up, meeting Reynolds' eyes directly. That was a long time ago. Your service record ends 18 months ago, Reynolds said. Honorable discharge following a classified mission. That resulted in multiple casualties. No details available at my clearance level, but the recommendations from your commanding officers are unprecedented. The mention of her final mission hit Emily like a physical blow. She could see it all again. The intelligence failure, the ambush, the impossible choices made under enemy fire. Marcus Chun bleeding out in her arms while she tried to save his life and maintain covering fire simultaneously. The decorations they'd given her afterward, medals that felt like mockery for failing to bring everyone home alive. I left that life behind, she said quietly. I wanted something different. Thompson's expression had shifted to something approaching embarrassment. All those weeks I was giving you grief. You were. I mean, you could have ... Could have what? Emily's voice carried an edge of pain. Could have told you that I used to kill people for a living? That I've seen more combat than everyone in this room combined? That I came here because I was tired of being good at destroying things? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Commander Reynolds spoke with the kind of careful respect reserved for war heroes. Why maintenance work? With your qualifications, you could have had any position you wanted. Training roles, consulting, private security. The opportunities would have been limitless. Emily's laugh was bitter. Because I didn't want opportunities. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to do work that built things instead of tearing them apart. I wanted to serve without having to kill anyone. Webb leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. But today you save lives by doing exactly what you tried to leave behind. The observation hung in the air like smoke. Emily had spent months trying to convince herself that her violent skills were relics of a past she could abandon. But today had proven that sometimes those skills were exactly what the world needed. That was different, she said, though the words sounded weak even to her. People were dying. People are always dying somewhere, Reynolds said gently. The question is whether we use our abilities to help them or hide from the responsibility that comes with those abilities. Captain Hayes, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. All those times Thompson was hassling you. You could have shut him down without breaking a sweat. Why didn't you? Emily looked at Thompson, seeing his discomfort and genuine curiosity. Because Emily Carter, maintenance worker, doesn't know how to do that. She's just someone trying to live a quiet life, doing honest work, bothering no one. But that's not who you really are, Webb said softly. Today proved that. When it mattered, when lives were on the line, the real Emily Carter came out. The one who doesn't hesitate to act when people need saving. Emily felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The real Emily Carter got people killed. Good people. My team. Reynolds' expression softened with understanding. The mission that ended your service. What happened? For a long moment, Emily couldn't speak. The memories were too fresh, too painful. despite the months she'd spent trying to bury them. Finally, she forced the words out. Intelligence failure. We walked into an ambush that should never have happened. My spotter, Marcus Chun, took a sniper. Round to the chest. I had to choose between maintaining suppressive fire against 12 hostiles or trying to save his life. Her voice broke slightly. I chose to save him. While I was working on his wounds, 2 more team members were hit. Marcus died anyway, and my decision to prioritize medical care over tactical support cost us the mission. The room was completely silent. Emily could see the understanding dawning in their faces. She wasn't just a decorated war hero. She was a decorated war hero, carrying the weight of impossible choices and survivor's guilt. "So you came here to hide?" Thompson said, but his voice held no judgment. To be someone who didn't have to make those kinds of decisions anymore. I thought if I could just be Emily Carter, maintenance worker, I could stop being responsible for keeping people alive through violence. I could contribute something positive without having to calculate kill ratios and acceptable casualties. Webb shook his head slowly. But that's not how the world works. Your skills, your training, they're not just about destruction. Today, you use them to protect people. That's what they were always supposed to be for. Commander Reynolds closed the file folder and leaned back in her chair. Emily, what you did today saved lives. Not just the soldiers who were in that sniper's crosshairs, but potentially dozens more if the attack had succeeded. You used your abilities exactly as they were meant to be used, to protect others. I know, Emily said quietly. But every time I pull a trigger, I remember all the other times. All the people who didn't make it home because I wasn't good enough, fast enough, or made the wrong choice in a split second. The confession hung in the air between them. Emily had never spoken these words out loud before, never admitted the depth of her guilt and self-doubt to anyone. But somehow, surrounded by people who now knew exactly who she was, the truth felt manageable. Captain Hayes cleared his throat awkwardly. For what it's worth, I owe you an apology. We should have recognized your value instead of treating you like a security threat. Emily managed a small smile. You were doing your job. Someone with my background showing up and asking questions about security protocols. I should have raised red flags. But Thompson was right about one thing, Reynolds said. You don't belong in maintenance work. Not because you're not good at it, but because your talents are too valuable to waste on tasks that any competent person could handle. What are you suggesting? Emily asked, though she suspected she already knew. Stay here. Officially this time, as part of our training staff. Teach marksmanship. Help develop our defensive protocols. Share your expertise with people who could. Use it to stay alive. Webb nodded enthusiastically. We could use someone with your experience. Half our shooters couldn't hit a barn door at 500 meters, and our tactical awareness is amateur hour compared to what you demonstrated today. Emily looked around the room at faces that now held respect instead of suspicion, acceptance, instead of hostility. The offer was tempting, a chance to use her skills constructively, to teach others how to protect themselves without having to return to active combat operations. I'd want to keep some of the maintenance work, she said. Slowly, I like the simple tasks. They help me think clearly. Reynolds smiled. I think we can arrange that. Half-time instruction, half-time whatever kind of work helps you find peace. As the meeting broke up and people began filing out of the room, Thompson approached Emily with obvious discomfort. Look, I owe you a serious apology, he said. All those weeks of hassling you, trying to make your life difficult. I had no idea who you were or what you'd been through. Emily studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there. You couldn't have known. And honestly, part of me enjoyed having someone treat me like I was completely ordinary. It made the anonymity feel more real. Still, I was out of line. way out of line. If you wanted to, you could have made me regret every stupid comment Maybe, Emily admitted. But Emily Carter, maintenance worker, doesn't solve problems with violence. She just does her job and minds her own business. Thompson smiled ruefully. And Emily Carter, Delta Force veteran? She only uses violence when people are in danger. Today, people were in danger. As Emily walked back toward the shooting range that evening, she felt lighter than she had in months. Her secret was out, her cover blown completely, but somehow that felt like liberation rather than catastrophe. She was still Emily Carter, but now she could be all of who Emily Carter really was, maintenance worker and war hero. Someone seeking peace and someone capable of protecting others when peace wasn't possible. The base felt different now. Soldiers nodded respectfully as she passed, their eyes holding recognition rather than dismissal. Word had already spread about what had happened, about who their quiet maintenance worker really was. Tomorrow, she would begin teaching again, sharing knowledge that could keep people alive. But tonight, she had a shooting range to clean, and that's simple. Constructive work still brought her the peace she'd been seeking. Some truths, Emily realized, were worth revealing, especially when those truths could help others survive the kind of impossible situations she'd faced herself. Word traveled fast in a military environment. By the next morning, Emily's story had spread throughout Forward Base Alpha and beyond, reaching the attention of people who had strong opinions about former Delta Force operatives working in civilian contractor positions. Emily was organizing, cleaning supplies in the storage room when she heard familiar voices in the corridor, voices that made her blood run cold. Colonel James Mitchell and Major David Warren from Military Personnel Command had arrived for an unscheduled inspection, and their presence meant only one thing. Someone wanted her back in active service. "Where is she?" Mitchell's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "I want to speak with this Emily Carter immediately." Emily's hand stilled on the inventory clipboard. She recognized Mitchell's voice from her Delta Force days. He'd been the officer responsible for recruitment and retention of special operations personnel. His presence here meant that yesterday's revelations had traveled up the chain of command faster than she'd hoped. Captain Hayes' voice responded with careful diplomacy. "Sir, Miss Carter is currently performing her assigned duties. If you'd like to speak with her, I can arrange a meeting." "This isn't a request, Captain. This is a matter of national security." When personnel with Carter's qualifications are wasting their talents on menial labor, it represents a critical misallocation of military assets. Emily closed her eyes, knowing exactly where this conversation was heading. The military had invested millions of dollars in her training, and they weren't about to let that investment sweep floors indefinitely. Her peaceful anonymity had lasted exactly 18 hours. She finished organizing the supplies with mechanical precision, knowing it might be the last time she'd perform such simple, honest work. Then she walked to Hayes' office to face whatever consequences her moment of heroism had created. Mitchell was exactly as she remembered. Tall, gray-haired, with the kind of piercing stare that could make junior officers confess to crimes they hadn't committed. Major Warren stood beside him with a tablet, already pulling up files that probably contained her entire classified service record. "Emily Carter," Mitchell said, his voice carrying satisfaction and frustration in equal measure. "Do you have any idea how many people have been looking for you?" "I wasn't hiding, sir. My location and employment status were properly reported through all required channels. Don't play games with me, Carter. You know exactly what I mean. Someone with your qualifications has no business pushing a mop around a forward base when there are critical operations that need your expertise." Commander Reynolds stepped forward, her expression diplomatically neutral. "Colonel Mitchell, Ms. Carter has been performing excellent work here. Yesterday's incident demonstrated that her Skills remain sharp, and she's expressed interest in joining our training staff. Mitchell's laugh was harsh. Training staff? Commander, you're talking about one of the most effective special operations soldiers in military history. Her skills are wasted on anything short of Tier 1 missions. Emily felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being discussed like a resource rather than a person. Sir, with respect, I chose my current position because it suits my needs. I have no interest in returning to active special operations. Your interests are irrelevant. Mitchell snapped. Your country has invested too much in your training to let you waste it on maintenance work. There are situations developing that require your specific skill set. Warren looked up from his tablet. Ma'am, your psychological evaluations show some post-mission trauma following the Afghanistan incident, but nothing that should prevent you from returning to duty with proper support. The casual dismissal of her trauma made Emily's anger flare. Proper support? Major, have you ever held a dying teammate in your arms while trying to decide whether saving his life was worth letting other people die? No, ma'am, but then, don't tell me about proper support. Emily's voice carried an edge that made everyone in the room step back slightly. I came here because I needed to do work that builds things instead of destroying them. Because I needed to serve without killing. Because I needed to remember what it feels like to contribute something positive to the world. Mitchell's expression hardened. Carter, you're being selfish. While you're here playing with cleaning supplies, there are operations failing because we don't have personnel with your capabilities. People are dying because you've decided to have a crisis of conscience. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Emily could see the truth in it. Somewhere, special operations teams were undertaking missions that her expertise might help them survive. Her choice to step away from that world had consequences that extended far beyond her own peace of mind. That's not fair, Commander Reynolds interjected. Ms. Carter has served her country with distinction. She's earned the right to choose how she continues that service. Has she? Mitchell pulled out his own file folder, this one marked with classifications that made Hayes and Thompson look away reflexively. Because according to this, Carter's current psychological state represents a security risk. Someone with her knowledge and training, suffering from unresolved combat trauma, working in an unsupervised civilian position. That's a textbook counterintelligence concern. Emily felt the trap closing around her. Mitchell was threatening to classify her as a security risk, which would mean investigation, psychological evaluation, and possible detention until officials determined she posed no threat to national security. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want you back where you belong. Delta Force has a mission in 3 weeks that requires someone with your specific expertise. Long-range reconnaissance, surgical strikes, minimal collateral damage. It's exactly the kind of operation you were trained for. And if I refuse, Mitchell's smile was cold. Then we'll have to seriously evaluate whether someone with your psychological instability should have access to classified information and military facilities. The investigation alone would take months, and your current employment would obviously be terminated immediately. The threat was clear. Return to active duty or face official harassment that would destroy any chance of the peaceful life she'd been trying to build. Emily looked around the room at people who had become friends, knowing that Mitchell's retaliation would probably extend to them as well. Webb, who had been listening quietly from the corner, suddenly spoke up. Sir, what if there was a third option? Mitchell turned toward him with visible irritation. Such as consulting. Miss Carter stays here in her current capacity, but makes herself available for specialized training and advisory roles when needed. She gets to maintain the life she's chosen, but the military still has access to her expertise for critical situations. Emily felt a spark of hope. It was a compromise that might give her the best of both worlds, the piece of simple work combined. with the ability to help others when her skills were truly needed. But Mitchell was already shaking his head. Unacceptable. Carter's abilities are too valuable to waste on part-time consultation. This is a national security asset we're discussing, not a private contractor. I'm not an asset, Emily said firmly. I'm a person who has served her country faithfully and earned the right to make choices about her own life. Your choices have consequences, Mitchell replied. And right now, those consequences include people dying because the military's most effective operators are playing house instead of doing their jobs. The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily could feel everyone watching her, waiting to see how she would respond to the ultimatum that would determine the rest of her life. She thought about Marcus Chun, about the teammates she'd lost, about the weight of decisions made in split seconds under enemy fire. Then she thought about the simple satisfaction of cleaning the shooting range, the peace she'd found in work that built instead of destroyed. Finally, she looked directly at Mitchell, her voice steady and sure. Colonel, you can threaten me, investigate me, or try to force me back into active duty. But you can't make me be someone I've chosen not to be anymore. I've found a way to serve that doesn't require me to calculate acceptable casualties or choose who lives and who dies. That's worth more to me than any mission you could offer. Mitchell's expression darkened with anger, but before he could respond, the base alarm began wailing, the unmistakable sound of incoming threats that meant Emily's choice would be tested once again. The alarm meant incoming aircraft, unidentified contacts approaching from the northwest at high speed. Emily's mind automatically began calculating intercept vectors and defensive positions, while everyone else was still processing the sound. All personnel to defensive positions, Commander Reynolds ordered, but her voice carried uncertainty. Forward Base Alpha wasn't equipped for serious air defense, and everyone knew it. Through the office windows, Emily could see soldiers scrambling across the compound with the barely controlled panic of people facing threats they weren't prepared for. Their movements lacked coordination, their positions offered poor fields of fire, and their response time was far too slow for the kind of attack that seemed to be developing. Colonel Mitchell was barking orders into his radio, trying to coordinate with regional air defense, but Emily could hear the problem in his voice. Help was too far away. Whatever was coming would arrive long before any meaningful support could be deployed. Carter, Webb called out. What do you see? Emily was already at the window, her trained eye scanning the horizon for the telltale signs of incoming aircraft. There, 3 fast-moving dots approaching from the northwest, flying too low for passenger aircraft and too fast for routine military traffic. 3 contacts, probably helicopters, coming in fast and low, she reported automatically. Attack. Formation about 8 minutes out. How can you possibly know that? Major Warren demanded. Emily ignored him, her mind already shifting into the tactical assessment mode that had kept her alive through dozens of similar situations. The approaching aircraft would have overwhelming firepower advantage, but they'd also be vulnerable during their attack runs if someone could coordinate effective ground fire. We need to evacuate non-essential personnel to the hardened bunkers, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd planned defensive operations before. Everyone else needs to spread out and prepare concentrated fire on their approach vectors. Mitchell stared at her with something approaching amazement. You're doing it again. The moment there's danger, you automatically start thinking like a special operations planner. Emily realized he was right. Despite everything she'd said about wanting to leave that life behind, her first instinct was still to protect others. Through tactical expertise, the maintenance worker persona had disappeared completely, replaced by the cool professionalism that had made her one of Delta Force's most effective operators. This is who you really are, Reynolds said quietly. Not someone who's running from her past, but someone who uses that past to protect others when they need it. The approaching aircraft were visible now. Military helicopters flying in attack formation, their weapons systems clearly apparent. Emily watched them with the practiced eye of someone who'd been on both sides of similar operations. They're not American, she observed. Configuration looks Russian or Chinese, probably stolen or black market acquisition. 3 attack helicopters. Means they're planning to hit hard and extract fast. Webb was coordinating the base's defensive response, but Emily could see the problems. The soldiers were well trained for ground combat, but they had no experience with coordinated air defense. Their positions were wrong, their timing would be off, and their weapons weren't optimized for aerial targets. "Give me tactical command," Emily said suddenly. Everyone stared at her. Colonel Mitchell's expression was particularly shocked. She'd gone from refusing active duty to volunteering for command responsibility in the space of minutes. "What?" Hayes asked. "You need someone who knows how to coordinate air defense with limited resources. I've done this before, in situations just like this one." Emily looked around the room at faces that showed trust mixed with uncertainty. "I can keep more people alive if you let me coordinate the response." Mitchell's smile was grim with satisfaction. "Now you're thinking clearly. Authorization granted. Take tactical command of base defense." Emily grabbed the tactical radio and immediately began issuing orders with the crisp precision of someone who'd commanded similar operations. "All teams, this is Overwatch. Stagger your positions, focus fire on lead aircraft, wait for my signal before engaging." She directed soldiers to positions that would create overlapping fields of fire, told them exactly when to shoot for maximum effectiveness, and coordinated timing that would give them the best chance against overwhelming firepower. The helicopters approached with the confidence of attackers who expected no meaningful resistance. Emily watched them through binoculars, calculating range and timing with the same mathematical precision she'd once used for sniper shots. "Wait for it," she said into the radio. "Let them commit to their attack run." The lead helicopter opened. Fire first, its chain gun stitching lines of destruction across the compound. Emily waited until it was fully committed to its firing pass, then gave the order. All teams engaged now. The concentrated fire was devastating. Multiple rifle teams, targeting the same aircraft at the same moment, creating a wall of bullets that even armored helicopters couldn't ignore. The lead aircraft shuddered under the impact, its pilots struggling to maintain control. "Shift fire to aircraft 2, Emily ordered, already tracking the second helicopter's movement pattern. 3-second coordinated burst on my mark." Her tactical coordination was flawless. Each aircraft received the concentrated attention of every weapon on the base at the moment when it was most vulnerable. 2 helicopters crashed within minutes, and the third retreated under heavy fire as the alarm went silent and soldiers began checking for casualties. Emily found herself surrounded by people looking at her with something approaching awe. She'd just demonstrated tactical expertise that had saved dozens of lives, using skills that couldn't be learned from textbooks. Colonel Mitchell approached with an expression that mixed vindication with respect. That was extraordinary. Textbook air defense coordination under impossible circumstances. Emily handed back the tactical radio, her hand shaking slightly as adrenaline faded. That was necessity. People were in danger. "And you saved them," Webb pointed out, "using exactly the skills you've been trying to hide from." Emily looked around at the soldiers who were alive because of her coordination, at the base that remained functional because of her tactical expertise. She couldn't deny the satisfaction that came from using her abilities to protect others, or the sense of purpose that tactical command had given her. "I suppose I did," she admitted. Commander Reynolds stepped forward with a proposal that would change everything. "Emily, I want to offer you a position that might give you what you've been looking for." Chief of Base Security and Training Operations. You'd be responsible for defense planning, marksmanship instruction, and tactical coordination. It's leadership work that protects people, using your skills constructively. Emily considered the offer carefully. It would mean embracing her military expertise while staying away from the kind of offensive operations that haunted her dreams. Teaching others to defend themselves, planning protective measures, using her knowledge to save lives rather than take them. And I could still do maintenance work when I need the peace it brings me? Absolutely. Whatever helps you find balance. Emily looked at Colonel Mitchell, who was watching with obvious frustration. What about your mission in 3 weeks? Mitchell's expression was grim. We'll find someone else. But Carter, this arrangement is temporary. Your country will need your full capabilities again someday. Maybe, Emily said. But for now, this feels like the right way to serve. As the day wound down and Emily returned to cleaning the shooting range, she reflected on how much had changed. In just 2 days, her secret was out, her past revealed, but somehow that felt like liberation rather than loss. She was still Emily Carter, maintenance worker, but now she was also Emily Carter, protector and teacher. Soldiers approached her throughout the afternoon, thanking her for saving their lives, asking questions about tactical coordination, requesting training in marksmanship and defensive operations. Each conversation reminded her that her skills, properly used, were tools for protecting others rather than weapons for destroying them. That evening, as she finished organizing the cleaning supplies, Emily realized she'd found something she hadn't been looking for, a way to be all of who she was without having to choose between her past and her future. She could honor her fallen teammates by teaching others to survive, use her deadly skills to preserve life rather than end it, and find peace in simple work that built things rather than destroying them. Her journey from a lead operator to maintenance worker to protective instructor had taught her that healing didn't require abandoning who she'd been. Sometimes it meant finding new ways to use old gifts, ways that honored both the person she'd been and the person she was becoming. The shooting range was clean, the equipment properly maintained, and tomorrow she would begin teaching young soldiers how to stay alive in a dangerous world. For the first time in months, Emily Carter felt truly at peace with both her past and her future. Some stories, she reflected, weren't about choosing between different versions of yourself. They were about discovering that all those versions could work together, creating something stronger and more complete than any single identity could provide. In the distance, the sun set over 4 Base Alpha, painting the sky in shades of gold and red that reminded Emily of better days ahead. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.